It was just an ordinary night. Mark and I were sitting on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between us, the kind of evening we'd had countless times before. The soft glow of the television illuminated the room, and I could feel the warmth of his body next to mine. We were comfortable, relaxed, like we always were when we had a night in. I had a tendency to joke around a lot. It was my way of lightening the mood, especially when things felt a little too serious. Mark wasn't quite as playful as I was, but he always humored me, giving me a smile or a chuckle when I said something funny. That's why, when the thought crossed my mind, I didn't hesitate to share it with him. We had been talking about something unrelated, work, our friends, maybe the stress of adult life, when, out of nowhere, I decided to make a joke about cheating. It wasn't meant to be malicious, just a silly comment to make him laugh. I turned to him, with a grin on my face, and said, "You know, I'd cheat if I'd never get caught." It was one of those offhand remarks, the kind you don't really think about. A careless joke, said in the moment, with no real meaning behind it. I thought it was harmless, just a little laugh at the absurdity of it. After all, we were in a secure relationship. I wasn't planning on cheating, and he knew that. It was just a joke. But the moment the words left my mouth, I could feel the shift in the air. It was subtle at first, just a change in the tone of the room, but then it grew heavier. Mark didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. Instead, he looked at me, his expression frozen. His eyes were wide, his face pale, as if the words I had spoken had completely thrown him off. I couldn't understand why. I had made jokes like this before, nothing serious, just playful banter, and he'd always laughed along. But this time, something was different. His gaze locked onto mine, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his face unreadable, as if he was trying to process what I had said. I felt a pang of confusion. "Mark?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. "It's just a joke, babe. I didn't mean anything by it." He didn't respond right away. He stood up from the couch, walking toward the door without saying a word. His movements were slow, deliberate, and I could see the tension in his body. I followed him, trying to reach out, to explain, but he was already pulling on his jacket. "Where are you going?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. He didn't answer. He just grabbed his keys and headed out the door, leaving me standing there, staring at the spot where he had been. I called after him, but my voice faltered. The door slammed behind him, and I was left in stunned silence. I couldn't understand it. How had a harmless joke turned into something so serious? It didn't make sense. Mark had always been a little more reserved, a little more serious than I was, but he had never reacted like this before. Maybe he was just taking it too personally. Maybe it was just his pride, but whatever it was, it didn't feel right. I sat back down on the couch, staring at the empty space next to me, trying to wrap my mind around what had just happened. I told myself he'd be back soon. That he just needed some time to cool off. After all, it was just a joke, right? He would laugh it off. But as the minutes ticked by, the doubt began to creep in. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. I had made a mistake, sure, but I didn't know how to fix it. I wanted to call him, to tell him how sorry I was for what I'd said, but I didn't want to push him further away. So, I waited. But the more I waited, the more the silence grew, and the more I realized that I might have just made a joke that destroyed something I had taken for granted. The next morning, I woke up to an unfamiliar stillness. The usual warmth of Mark next to me was gone, replaced by an empty space on the bed. I had expected him to come back the night before, to walk in, apologize, maybe even laugh it off. But the door never opened. Instead, the silence lingered like a heavy fog. I rubbed my eyes and tried to shake off the exhaustion that clung to me. I told myself that everything would be fine, that he'd come around. After all, I knew Mark. He wasn't one to make rash decisions or overreact. But as I rolled out of bed and walked into the kitchen, I could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. I made coffee, the smell filling the air, but it did nothing to ease the tension in my chest. I checked my phone, no texts, no missed calls. I sent him a message, just a simple, "Hey, I'm really sorry about last night. Can we talk?" But there was no reply. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, willing it to ring. I knew I had messed up, but I didn't think it would come to this. He'd been upset, sure, but divorce? Divorce was not something we had ever talked about. We had argued before, small things, stupid things, but this was different. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher in the sky, but there was no sign of Mark. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice shaky with emotion. "Please, Mark, I didn't mean it. It was just a joke. Can we please talk? I love you." Still, nothing. Just when I thought I couldn't take the silence any longer, I heard a knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. Finally. I rushed to open it, hoping to see Mark standing there, ready to make up. But when I swung the door open, I was greeted by a stranger, a man in a suit, holding a manila envelope in his hand. "Are you Emily Brooks?" he asked, his voice professional, distant. "Yes, that's me. What's going on? Where's Mark?" I asked, my voice faltering. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. The man didn't answer my question. Instead, he handed me the envelope. "These are divorce papers," he said flatly. "Your husband has filed for divorce. He's no longer willing to continue the marriage." I felt the ground beneath me tilt. Divorce papers? I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I took the envelope from him, my fingers numb. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. There had to be some mistake. Mark couldn't be serious. I had made a mistake, but we could work through it, couldn't we? Wait, no, I said, my voice breaking. This is a misunderstanding. Please, tell him I didn't mean it. But the man turned away, already walking down the driveway, his back to me. I was left standing in the doorway, the envelope heavy in my hands. I closed the door slowly, feeling the walls close in around me. I sank to the floor, the divorce papers still in my grasp. How had we gone from sitting on the couch, laughing together, to this? How had a simple joke, a careless comment, led to this? I couldn't wrap my head around it. Mark had never been the type to give up on us so easily. Sure, he'd been upset, but this was beyond anything I had ever imagined. He had always been the calm one, the steady one. And I had always been the impulsive one. The one who joked when things got tense, the one who never really took life seriously. But I never thought that would come back to haunt me. I thought of all the good times we had shared, the late-night talks, the trips, the simple moments that had made us feel like we were in this together. And now, it felt like it had all been shattered in an instant. The divorce papers sat in front of me, a stark reminder of how quickly everything could change. I had joked about cheating, but I had never considered that it might be my own actions, my own words, that could destroy the one thing I had taken for granted. My marriage. As I stared at the papers, I knew there was no going back. Mark had made his decision. I had pushed him too far, and now I was left with nothing but regret. And that feeling, that hollow ache in my chest, was all I had left. The days that followed were a blur of empty spaces and unanswered questions. I spent the entire weekend in the same state, numb, unable to escape the weight of what had just happened. The house felt cold, even though the sun shone brightly outside. Every room I walked into seemed to echo with the absence of Mark. His things, his shoes by the door, his jacket on the back of the chair, were all still there, but they felt foreign now, as if they belonged to someone else. Someone I no longer knew. I couldn't help but replay that moment over and over in my head. His face when I made the joke. The way he had looked at me, not with anger, but with something deeper, something like disappointment. I had known for a long time that I wasn't always the easiest person to live with. I had my quirks, my impulsive nature, the jokes I would make without thinking. But I never once thought that I would break him, that my careless words could bring everything crashing down. I sat at the kitchen table each day, staring at the empty chair across from me. It was a constant reminder of how I had messed up. I kept expecting Mark to walk through the door, to apologize for leaving, to tell me that he hadn't meant to overreact. But the silence never ended. His absence became a loud, painful presence in every room. I didn't leave the house for days. I couldn't bring myself to go anywhere. I knew people would ask about him. They would ask why I was alone, why Mark wasn't with me. The truth was that I didn't have an answer. And I couldn't bear to tell them what had happened, especially since I couldn't even explain it to myself. My phone sat on the counter, always within reach, but it never rang. No messages, no calls from him. I tried to be patient, to give him the space he needed, but the longer the silence lasted, the more I felt like I was suffocating. I had given him space, but was it too much? Had I waited too long to fix things? On the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I called his phone, my hands shaking as I dialed the number. It went straight to voicemail, just like it had the last time I called. "Mark," I said, my voice cracking. "Please, pick up. I just want to talk. I'm sorry for what I said. I didn't mean it. Please, I need to fix this." I left the message, feeling the tears well up in my eyes as I spoke. I had never felt so helpless, so completely lost. I had no idea how to make it right. I had no idea if he even wanted to make it right. I tried to distract myself with small tasks around the house, cleaning, cooking, anything to keep my mind occupied, but it was impossible to focus. Every moment was consumed by the thought of him, by the gnawing feeling that I had lost him forever. My mind kept drifting back to the divorce papers, to the moment when my world had turned upside down. How had it come to this? How had something so trivial spiraled into something so huge? I began to think about our relationship, the good and the bad. I thought about how we had met, about the dreams we had shared, about the life we had built together. And then I thought about my actions, my careless joke, and how it had unraveled everything. I realized, in that moment, just how much I had taken him for granted. How I had assumed that things would always be fine, that he would always be there. I had joked about cheating, not because I wanted to cheat, but because I thought he would laugh it off. I never thought about how my words might affect him, how they might cut deeper than I intended. I never thought about how fragile trust could be, how one moment of carelessness could destroy something so precious. I wanted to fix it, to take back those words and make everything right. But I didn't know how. I didn't know if it was even possible. All I could do was wait, to hope that somehow, somewhere, Mark would realize that I was truly sorry. That I wasn't the person I had appeared to be in that moment. That the joke was just a stupid mistake, one that I deeply regretted. But as the days passed, I couldn't help but wonder if it was too late. Would he ever forgive me? Would we ever find our way back to each other? Or had I broken something that could never be repaired? The silence was unbearable, and with every minute that ticked by, I felt the distance between us grow. It was like a wall had been built, one I didn't know how to tear down. It had been over a week since I had last spoken to Mark. The silence felt endless, and with every passing day, I could feel myself slipping further into the despair that had taken root in my heart. I had spent hours reflecting on everything I had done wrong, the careless joke that had led to this mess, and the hurt that had been caused. But no matter how much I blamed myself, the one thing I couldn't do was bring him back. I had reached out to him in every way I could think of, texts, calls, even emails. But nothing. He hadn't responded to a single one. I kept wondering what he was doing, where he was, if he was hurting as much as I was. I had never felt so powerless in my life. On the 8th day, I was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the TV but not really watching it. I couldn't focus on anything. My mind was consumed with thoughts of him, of how I could make things right. I had begun to accept that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't come back. Maybe the damage was too great. Then, unexpectedly, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. At first, I didn't even move. I had become so accustomed to the silence that I had almost forgotten what it was like to have my phone light up with a message. But when I saw the name on the screen, my heart stopped. It was Mark. I froze for a moment, my fingers hovering over the phone. My breath caught in my throat. Was this really happening? Was he finally reaching out? I opened the message, my hands trembling as I read his words. I've been thinking a lot. I don't know where we go from here, but I'm willing to talk. Can you meet me tomorrow? The words hit me like a wave. I couldn't believe it. After everything, after the silence, after the divorce papers, he wanted to talk. My mind raced. What did this mean? Was it a sign that he still cared, or was he simply being polite, trying to close the chapter of our marriage without confrontation? I didn't have the answers, but what I did know was that he was willing to talk. And that was more than I had hoped for. It was a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had enveloped me for so long. I immediately replied, my fingers moving faster than my thoughts. Yes, I'd love to. I'm sorry, Mark. I just want to fix things. I sent the message and sat back, feeling a strange mix of hope and fear. I had no idea how this conversation would go, what would come of it, but for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a chance, a small chance, that things could be repaired. I spent the rest of the evening trying to prepare myself for whatever was to come. I thought about what I would say, what I needed to apologize for, how I would explain myself. But the truth was, I didn't know if words would be enough. I didn't know if I could fix the damage I had done, but I was willing to try. The following day, I stood in front of the mirror, looking at myself. I had spent so many days questioning everything about myself, my actions, my worth, that I hardly recognized the person staring back at me. But in that moment, I knew I had to be strong. I had to face whatever came next, even if it meant admitting the truth about my mistakes. As I got into my car, the anticipation and nervousness built up inside me. I didn't know if this was the start of healing or the end of everything we had built. But all I knew was that I had one shot, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. I arrived at the cafe early, my heart pounding in my chest as I walked inside. The quiet hum of the place felt surreal, as if the world outside had stopped moving and all that existed was this moment, this meeting with Mark. I couldn't stop my mind from racing. What would he say? How would I explain myself? What if he was done, completely over everything? I couldn't bear the thought. I sat at a corner table, my fingers nervously tracing the rim of my coffee cup. The minutes seemed to stretch into hours as I waited for him. And then, just as I began to wonder if he had changed his mind, I saw him. Mark. He walked through the door, his eyes immediately locking with mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. There was a quiet tension between us, the weight of everything that had happened hanging in the air. He seemed just as unsure as I felt, but he gave me a small, tentative smile as he walked over to the table. Hi, he said, his voice a little hoarse, as if he hadn't used it much in the past week. Hi, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He sat down across from me, his eyes scanning my face as though searching for something, answers, maybe, or maybe just trying to make sense of the situation. I could feel the intensity of his gaze, and it made me nervous, like he could see straight through me. I've been thinking a lot about everything, he said after a long silence. About what you said, and what I did. I won't lie, I was hurt. I didn't know what to think when you made that joke. I thought I knew you, but then you said that, and I felt like maybe I didn't. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat growing. I'm so sorry, Mark, I said, my voice breaking. It was stupid. I didn't mean it, It was just a joke, and I didn't even think about how it would make you feel. I was wrong, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting those words. He didn't respond immediately, just sat there looking at me. I could feel the weight of his silence pressing down on me, but then, after what felt like an eternity, he exhaled slowly. I know you didn't mean it, but words are powerful, aren't they? He said softly. They can destroy things without even trying. I needed time to process what you said. I wasn't sure if it was a joke or if you really felt that way. I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. I don't. I love you, Mark. I don't know why I said that. I'm so sorry for everything. I never wanted to hurt you. There was another long pause, and for a moment, I wondered if he would walk away. But then he surprised me. You're right, he said, his voice gentler now. Words can hurt, but they can also heal. I needed to see that you really understood the impact of what you said. And I think you do. I looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of what he was thinking. He smiled faintly. I'm not saying we're magically fixed, but maybe we can start over. We both have things we need to work through, but I'm willing to try if you are. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. I felt the tightness in my chest ease, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to believe that things might actually be okay. Maybe not perfect, but better. We could work through this together. I want to try, I said, my voice steady now, though my heart still raced. I don't want to lose you, Mark. I'll do whatever it takes. He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. It was a simple gesture, but it meant more than anything in that moment. The silence that had defined our relationship for the past week finally began to lift, replaced by something far more powerful, understanding, forgiveness, and the possibility of a new beginning. As we sat there, talking, I realized that this wasn't the end of our story. It was a new chapter, one where we would both have to work harder, communicate more, and learn from our mistakes. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what had been broken. And this time, we would be stronger for it.